Welcome to our Quarter 1 Lit Circle presentation.
Our presentation is about Pride and Prejudice.
Written by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is the story of the Bennet family trying to marry off their daughters to young, wealthy men. And throughout the story, we're introduced to many characters such as Mr. Collins, Bingley, Wickham, and Darcy. Throughout the story, they overcome pride, prejudice, kind of societal blindness, into a deeper valuation of each other, and eventually into marriage.
As book critics, what is your overall review of the novel? What is the moral of the story?
I would say that overall, Pride and Prejudice is a really good book. Its main moral, to me, appears to be that you really can't judge a book by its cover. Elizabeth and Darcy get really poor first impressions of each other, and it really plays out through the entire story and has drastic effects that last for a very long time in the story. And the story seems to depict that when they finally can see past these initial opinions that they have of each other, that's when they really become the heroes, and they really achieve the state of excellence that the book seems to emphasize as the target goal.
In addition to that, Daniel, I would happen to agree that I believe that it's a very good book. Furthermore, I believe that not only is the moral don't judge a book by its cover, I believe the moral is more of like a look into the intricate workings of Victorian society. For example, back then, marriage was more of a business transaction than it is today. A great deal of a family's fortune and future depended solely upon exactly who they married their daughters off to. So it gives an example into the lives and kind of mindset of people living in that era.
I agree with you, Alex. As the topic line in the novel says, it is a truth, universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Because of this, mothers of these potential wives work diligently to have their wives be married to the single men.
We see a predominant example in the story in the character of Mrs. Bennet, who makes it her life mission to make sure that her daughters are wed to a man of financial prosperity to ensure economic stability throughout their lives. This book does a really great job with a topic sentence, demonstrating it throughout the book with the character of Mr. Bingley and at the end, Mr. Darcy.
Hey, Daniel, can you think of any thematic connections between Pride and Prejudice and any other book?
You know, I think I can. One of the themes of Pride and Prejudice is romance. And in The Awakening, there's a lot of romance that happens. So Edna is constantly in pursuit of happiness and fulfillment, and she tries to find that through romance with various different people, some simultaneously. And in Pride and Prejudice, they're driven by their goal of marriage and love for each other.
A thematic connection between Pride and Prejudice and Huckleberry Finn would be the theme of prejudice. In Huckleberry Finn, the society is prejudiced towards Jim because he is a slave and he is African American. In that time, slaves were looked at as less than people. They don't give him a chance to understand his true personality. However, Huckleberry Finn looks past that prejudice and gets to know Jim and finds out that he's actually a really nice guy. Whereas in Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth shows prejudice towards Darcy. She initially judges him because of his class and wealth instead of getting to know him. He doesn't give him a chance. Until later in the story, he finds out he's actually a really nice guy. And so they become in love and they marry.
Jack, can you compare Pride and Prejudice thematically to any work the class has read in common?
Well, of course I can. One of the themes in Pride and Prejudice, wealth, is the same theme as one of the themes in The Great Gatsby, wealth. Darcy is wealthy. He has a lot of money. Jay Gatsby, wealthy, has a lot of money. Same thing.
How does that wealth affect their character?
It makes them come off as this kind of dominant figure that can really do a lot with what they have with the wealth, but they can't do everything that you need.
Well said, I agree.
How about you, Alexander?
Well, I believe social structure and social standing both connect Great Expectations and Pride and Prejudice.
Wow, that's excellent. Can you give an example or explanation?
For example, the Bennets are trying to marry off their daughters in order to keep their social standings and their house. While in Great Expectations, Pip is trying to rise to the social ranks due to the gifts of a mysterious benefactor.
Excellent, thank you.
One of Foster's elements present in Pride and Prejudice is symbols. As Foster described, symbols are what the reader makes them. A reader can determine anything to be a symbol. In Pride and Prejudice, one of these symbols would be ballroom dances. The families would get together and have ballroom dances as a way to have their daughters find a spouse. They would have their daughters look for wealthy husbands so that they could marry into a higher social class and become successful. Success was measured based off marriage. Marrying wealthy made you a successful woman. These ballrooms were used as a way to find your man. If you want a man, go to the ball.
Another of Foster's elements is weather. Weather is shown when Jane becomes ill after her horse ride to Netherfield. When she gets there, she's very sick, and the trip was supposed to start a relationship between Jane and Bingley. However, it comes to symbolize that later on in their relationship, once it's been started, it'll be very tumultuous and difficult. It also can be very important and symbolic in a way, because Elizabeth becomes very muddied because of the rain of the previous night. So on her trip to Netherfield to visit Jane, she becomes very dirty and disheveled, which Darcy sees as making her below him, and that stays through the rest of the plot as Darcy sees her as a person below him until the very end.
Therefore, ballroom dances are a symbol of finding success through romance and marriage.
Another one of Foster's elements is blindness. Blindness is both a key part in Pride and Prejudice, which Elizabeth and Darcy have at the beginning of the story. Elizabeth's prejudice doesn't allow her to see that Darcy is actually an okay guy, and Darcy's pride does not allow him to see that Elizabeth could actually be a good marriage prospect. It later melts away at the end of the story where they can see clearly that, and then they get married.
The geography of Pride and Prejudice is both simple and complex. They should probably start with the simple part of it. The story begins in 1812 and around southern England. Many of the animals located there, or at least are brought up in the story, are horses and cows. Some of the only plant life mentioned just happens to be grass. Some of the structures are very important. They all happen to be manor houses or local townships, such as Wiltshire. The Longbourn is where all the Bennets live. Lucas Estate is where the Lucas family resides, and Pemberley Manor is the home of Darcy. The weather around the setting is both cool and rainy, with fair weather indicating a pleasant exchange between the characters. But the characters is where it gets very complex. The most important characters are Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, Elizabeth Bennet, Jane Bennet, and their sisters, the Bingleys, Charles Bingley, Fitzwilliam Darcy, Mr. Collins, and Mr. Wickham.
In Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen used very high level of formal diction. This is because many of her characters were members of the gentry, a very formal, elegant people. Because of this, many of them used very high caliber vocabulary, and there is little to no slang to be found anywhere in this entire book. As a result, there is also very little figurative language to be found. This means that when figurative language is used, it is far more significant to the plot and allows us to understand the characters better. An example of this is when the visit to Pemberley, Elizabeth describes Darcy's house as being very handsome, and this is an implied metaphor that Darcy himself is also becoming more and more handsome in Elizabeth's mind. So essentially, all figurative language in this book is being used to develop the characters in a very deep and thorough manner. The literary lens of Marxist criticism focuses on who has money, who does not, and how it influences the relationships between them. In Pride and Prejudice, one of the characters who has money is Darcy. He's a very rich person, and at the start of the story, he's found to be very arrogant and snobbish because of the way he was raised and his personal fortune. He does not like anyone who's poorer than him, as evidenced by he literally tells Elizabeth that it would be an insult for him to dance with her at the start of the story. However, throughout the story, his character's developed to be a more and more likable person, and he's depicted in a better light at the end of the story than at the beginning. Accompanying this change of how he's depicted in the story is a change in his personality, because at the end of the story, he is more open and willing to talk to and associate with people of lower social standing. So what this means through the Marxist lens is that one of the morals of Pride and Prejudice is that by casting aside dislike for people of lower social class, you're able to identify more with their personal virtue and value, and that is a very admirable and beneficial quality about yourself.
Looking at the historical lens, Pride and Prejudice takes place in England during the early 19th century. It portrays the Bennets, who are part of the upper middle class of England society. This class is known as the gentry. This reflects Jane Austen's time in England. She also lived in the 19th century and was part of this upper middle class. Throughout the novel, Jane Austen portrays the social customs of the gentry. Another prominent family in Jane Austen's novel is the Bingleys. Charles Bingley is a wealthy young man who moves near the Bennets. Bingley is considered new money because he didn't inherit a family estate. However, he does make £5,000 a year, which is a lot for a wealthy young man during the 19th century in England. The Bennets look at Bingley as a possible suitor for their eldest daughter, Jane. During the 1800s, success of a young woman was based off the wealth of their husband. Mrs. Bennet is overjoyed at this opportunity for her daughters. She proclaims, "But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment would be for one of them." Mrs. Bennet wants her daughters to be successful so that the Bennet name remains successful. Another historical aspect in Pride and Prejudice is the presence of the military. One of the main male characters, Wickham, is a member of the military. He is a part of an English militia. The militia was a way for unsuccessful men to find success in England. In the case of Wickham, he fails to achieve inheritance from the Darcy family because he tries to take advantage of the Darcy daughter named Georgiana. He joins the militia in an attempt to save his reputation. When Wickham's militia arrives in Meryton, the Bennet girls see an opportunity to find a possible suitor. Example of historical aspects in Pride and Prejudice is the expectations of women. In England culture in the 1800s, women were expected to excel in multiple categories to be considered a possible option for marriage. The categories include singing, playing piano, reading, speaking French, dancing, and also, of course, being beautiful. Also, a woman was considered more suitable if they came from a wealthy family. Once married, wives were expected to obey their husbands and be faithful to them. This is shown during the Bennets' attempt to find their husband. In Elizabeth's case, Darcy overlooks her at first because she's pretty, but she's not as pretty as Jane. And also, the Bennet family isn't full of money. They have money, but not as much as he wants.
Pride and Prejudice can be viewed through this psychological lens. Jane Austen was born and raised in England in the 1800s, which gives the story a taste of what the culture was like back then. And we can see Austen portray her own life characteristics in the society through the character of Elizabeth, because she felt pressured to marry a man with an inheritance that was suitable for her, just like many other young women at the time. We can also see her portray herself through her literature and her personality traits into Elizabeth, such as her taste for literature, her view of love over arranged marriages, skill in the art of conversation, and an overall wit as a person. John.
My literary lens, I decided to look at it through the reader response angle. I felt, all in all, Pride and Prejudice was a very good book. The plot was sometimes a little bit slow, but at the same time, it always seemed to move at a very leisurely and pace you could keep up with. The characters were well written enough to where you could distinguish the motivations between the two of them. For example, Darcy acts very prideful, but at the same time, he's actually a very sensitive person, while Elizabeth is both witty and charming, and at the same time off-put by her prejudice against Mr. Darcy. If I had one major criticism to the book, and it's kind of a minute one, but it's the way Jane Austen introduced and named her characters. For example, all of the Bennets are referred to by Bennet, or Miss Bennet, and it's very confusing as to exactly which character she's talking about when related from an outside source. For example, Mr. Darcy would refer to, "Oh, there goes Miss Bennet," and at the time the reader has no idea exactly who he's talking about. Furthermore, her introductions to some of these characters is also very difficult. For example, the character of Catherine Bennet is introduced to us first as Kitty, and at the time we as the readers have no idea what she's talking about. But all in all, it was a very good read, and I thoroughly recommend it.
The painting The Bridesmaid depicts the differences between the upper and lower class. There is a bridesmaid depicted in the middle of the image wearing a very beautiful, elegant dress, as she's accompanied by a very handsome young man. They are creating contrast between themselves and the poor around them, specifically a young boy in the bottom corner of the image. This young boy is not wearing nearly as fine of clothing as them, and he appears to be calling out to the upper class for something. This mirrors the struggle of the Bennett family in that the Bennett family is trying to find suitable bachelors for their daughters who will have sufficient money to provide for them, and as well as social snobbery because the upper class believe themselves to be above the lower class and to be better than them, so they refuse to listen to the lower class.
Piece of art is The Ball by Victor Gabriel Gilbert. This piece portrays a beautiful ballroom with many elegant men and women dancing and watching. In Pride and Prejudice, the balls are an important symbol. They signify the importance of finding a wealthy and attractive spouse. In the story, a girl must marry a noble man in order to be considered successful. In the piece of art, the girls who are not dancing are looking around the room hoping to find a respectable man. Also, in the bottom left corner of the painting, there is an older woman talking to two younger women. The older woman reflects how a girl's choice in a man must be approved by the girl's family. In Pride and Prejudice, Bingley is approved for by Jane by her mother, Mrs. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet declares, "I am quite delighted with him. He is so excessively handsome." Finding a suitable partner at a ball is a prominent symbol in Pride and Prejudice.
My work of art was The Journey of the Magi by Stefano di Giovanni. This work of art depicts the three magi on their journey to Bethlehem, despite their little knowledge of the king they wanted to visit, who is Jesus Christ. It parallels in the story how Darcy, he didn't know what was ahead of him on his journey to the Netherfield with Mr. Bingley, and what he got out of the trip was greater than he was expecting.
The work of art I chose was 5 O'Clock Tea by Julius LeBlanc Stewart. In it, a group of socialites, being Victorian men and women, are gathering for an afternoon tea party. Displays the environment in which Elizabeth would have spent time and probably would have prospered. A social gathering designed for the entertainment of guests and the practice of polite and intellectual discussion.
The song I chose was Classic Man by Jadena. It's a song about a high-class, high economic status man and some of the responsibilities that come along with his high social status, as well as some of the benefits, such as having many women interested in becoming his wife. This parallels some of the conflict in Pride and Prejudice because there are many wealthy men who are trying to find women of suitable status, as well as feeling themselves to be above those of lower class, and the conflict that they feel within themselves and with others to not associate with anyone who they deem to be below them in economic/social status.
My song is Ballroom Blitz by Sweet. This song describes a fiasco that occurs in a ballroom. The lyrics include, "And the girl in the corner, let no one ignore her." This can be paralleled to the girls in Pride and Prejudice, who are constantly looking for attention. All of the single women who attend the balls try their best to attract men. Their goal is to find a wealthy man who will want to marry them. The balls are often full of energy and drama, just like the song Ballroom Blitz.
I chose was Bless the Broken Road by Rascal Flatts. This song is about one's trial and error and self-discoveries they make that leads them to the person they are meant to be with. It is parallel to the story in that Darcy's change of belief when it comes to the importance of social status in a marriage prospect. As he went on his broken road, he changed his views on who he would like to marry ideally. At the beginning, he didn't see Elizabeth as a good person to be married with because of her low social status, but he changed his mind and they got married at the end.
The song I chose was It Was a Very Good Year by Frank Sinatra, the one and only. In the song, Frank Sinatra is reminiscing about the time he spent as a young boy falling in love within a small town. It mirrors the stories of the Bennets as they are slowly and surely married off to the local suitors.
Questions?
Did you like the book?
I love the book. Okay, for real, anyone have any questions?